Rolling.
Alright, Rawze here with, what's your name?
It's me, who else?
It's me, who else? There you go. He's got his truck here. We're going to do an overhead set. I figure we'd make some video on how to do an overhead set with backyard mechanics in our backyard tree for drivers, you know, how a driver would do an overhead set. You know, not how, it's not an instruction video for professional shops, but, you know, if a driver wants to do his own overhead set, we'll do as best we can, and we'll make some YouTube video. How about that?
Yay!
Sounds good.
Alright, anyways, ISX 871. First thing you got to do is you got to be able to get to the motor to be able to, what they call, bar the engine. Where you take a big wrench, it's going to be bigger than this. Take a big wrench, you put it in here where the air compressor is, in the face here, and you turn the engine by hand with a large wrench. That'll allow us to turn the motor over so we can get to the right position for each of the valve sets. You've got on the crankshaft damper, which is this guy down here.
Hold on.
That big ring. Okay, you've got on the crankshaft damper, you've got some markings on there. This one's rusted up, so we're going to have some fun trying to find them. Maybe have to take some sandpaper to it or something. And you've got marks A, B, and C, and you have pin and I think TDC or some other marks. But what we're concerned with is A, B, and C. And what you do is you manually bring the engine around to A, and then you check the crossheads to see if they're loose for either cylinder number 1 or cylinder number 6. You know, we have a little chart here that says where A is, and you can get this off the manual or have somebody at Cummins print it out for you or find it online. And it says A. You don't have to zoom in on it. You need to find the right information.
Okay.
It says here A is either cylinder 1 or cylinder 6. So what you do is you roll it around to A, you check the two crossheads, and you see if they're both loose. If they're not both loose, if one's loose and one's tight, then check number 6. They'll probably be both loose. What you need to do is you need to roll it around to A so that cylinder number 1, both of them are loose, instead of cylinder number 6. And if you don't get it to A, and if A is, you know, not correct, then you can just roll the engine around again to A, and then you'll get both crossheads loose for cylinder number 1. That way you'll know where you're at. I always start with cylinder number 1. You know, some of the mechanics and guys, wherever they end up first is where they start. That's okay too, but I like to keep things in sequence. I guess it's just me, but I always start with cylinder number 1. So we're going to take this, and how we get to the engine to bar it is we're going to take off the big blue pipe, because when we do this with our wrench, if you're lazy and you don't take this off, what happens is you'll need quite a little bit of clearance here, and you'll hit the bottom of this. You'll hit it repeatedly, and it can damage the inner wall of this blue pipe and eventually collapse it. It'll eventually collapse. I've seen quite a few of them where they've cracked in here, where guys were lazy, it put a dent in this thing, and then later on it cracked and collapsed, you know, and caused fuel mileage problems. So it's just not good to have this in the way. So we're going to take this out of the way. We loosened up this clamp for these two hoses here, for the power steering, so we can pull the wrench down this way. We're going to take this bar, we're going to take this tube off. By the way, this tube comes off with 2 screws here, and then you just kind of pull it down and then twist it, and it unscrews the whole oil filler tube. So we'll do that, and then we'll take this off. So I guess we'll just get started here. So go ahead and take that tube off there. Got that. That's the oil filler tube. Yeah.
Got it.
And it's plastic.
Yeah, it's plastic, so you gotta be careful with it.
So don't put a crescent wrench on here to twist it with.
Gotcha.
Go, grab it.
You tell me what to do.
Yeah, just grab that and twist it around. Try not to break it.
It looks like it's also plastic.
Yeah, it's plastic too. You just gotta be careful with it, not break it. There you go. It's got a little O-ring on the back.
I'm trying to get past that wiring on this thing.
Yeah, your engine, I don't think this has been done. maybe. You got a lot of salt corrosion on the engine, you can't really tell. There you go. We got that out.
Yes, it is plastic.
Yeah, it's plastic.
Rolling.
If I could keep it on the nut, maybe that shorty would be better. Just fine, thank you. This is we took the bolt out of here, dropped the bar down, so that he could bar the motor.
Okay.
You trying to take the blue pipe? What'd you have to do to get it?
I've loosened the clamp right here off the end of the intake and the clamp onto the top of the radiator. Rawze advises leaving this on here. And so now I've loosened this up, I'll just slide it over. And then I'll pull back a little bit and pull it out. And then I'll struggle real hard. Not really.
And to turn the engine or bar the engine, you need a little short 3/4 inch adapter. The face of the water pump, I don't know if you want to come around this side of me.
Sure.
The face of the water pump has a square fitting that will fit a 3/4 inch adapter. So drop it in there.
Okay.
Pop it in, lock it in. Now it's in there. You can turn the motor with this. Now that we have this other stuff out of the way. And I do it with this nice torque wrench that I use for doing my lug nuts on my tires and all that stuff with. But if you don't want to spend $200 for one of those, you can always get one of these 3/4 inch ratchets and a pipe. That's how I used to do it. You know, you just put it on there like this. Get it on there. It's very important to know this. When you do an overhead set or you bar the engine, only ever bar it pulling it towards you with the ratchet, you know, going the other way. So you're actually turning it, this little thing, this way. Counterclock or clockwise, looking at it from the front. So put your bar on here. It's about you know, it can be really easy to turn in some places. In some places it can be about 350 foot-pounds of torque up to. So you don't really want to try to turn it with a little ratchet. I mean, this bar here gives you just a little bit more leverage so you're not fighting it. It's not so much that it's going to break your ratchet. If you want to come over around this side, you can see the engine actually turn. So you get on it and you turn it and you get on it. You get maybe one click at a time. So that's why you have to have all this stuff loose so it stays out of your way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can see the radiator moving.
Yeah, you can see the radiator and everything moving a little bit. So that's why you want to loosen all those brackets up. So what we need to do now is your incredibly rusty wheel. We need to find where they stamped A, B, and C on it, which isn't going to be easy. Alright, well, we marked our crankshaft damper with A, B, and C where it's at on the damper. We finally found it, sanded it off, and marked it with a Sharpie. Now we're ready to turn the engine and put it in the right position and take this cover off. You already loosened all the bolts?
Yes.
There's 4, 8 bolts, 10 millimeters. They don't come out of the holes, they just sort of pop up. And to get this cover off, I like to take a big flathead screwdriver and get under the cover and just sort of put a little pressure and sort of get it loose a little bit so that the gasket doesn't get torn there. That side came off. Get the gasket loose. There it goes. This one hasn't been off in a long time. If it's never been off at all. Now we got it loose. We can take it off. Come on up. And this is the cover for the motor. I'm going to set that down out of the side there. Just make sure you don't get any trash in it or anything. There we go.
You should almost turn it upside down so it doesn't get dirt and leaves in it.
Good idea. Let's flip it over. We can also set our tools on it. And we can wipe it off before we set it back down on there. So, alright. This is our overhead. We got a little bit of dirt and trash right here. You can see from this edge because of this thing here was a little dirty. So we're gonna have to clean this a little bit before we go much further. So just keep that in mind if this is all dirty. And you can't get in here to clean prior, so you just gotta kind of clean this out. Get a little paper towels and we'll wipe all this down. There's a little bit of sand in the edge right here. So we'll do that. We also want to inspect these cams and check everything while we're doing our overhead. Alright, so we're looking at cylinder number 1 here. And I've got it rotated around to A on our crankshaft damper. And this one's loose, but this one's tight. You see that? These are the cross heads. That one's tight. So if you kind of zoom around this way, back in here, it's kind of hard to see with the camera. But you can see that one's loose and that one's loose. So we're on A6. That's cylinder number 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So we're actually sitting on A6. So we don't want that. I don't want to start there. It's hard enough to get back in there to do the overhead back there, but I don't want to start there. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate the motor around again to A, and you'll see that both of these are loose the next time I come across A. Alright, I'm on A6, so I'm going to go to A1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate that crankshaft damper and the motor A, B, C back to A again so that we know we're on number 1, because right now we know we're on 6. So I'm going to do this. I don't know if you want to zoom in down there on the mark. You can see that I'm on A right there. You see that?
Yep.
Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and rotate this. And go to
Just went past B.
B. We'll go past C and we'll go back to A.
There's C.
There's C. And now you get close to A.
I don't see it on there yet.
I know we're getting close. I don't want to pass it. You don't want to go past it and come back. You should never do that.
You can only go one way when you do this. Here's A.
Alright. Where is A? Okay, there's A. Come up to it.
Very careful.
Okay. I'm going to have to get right where you're at to see.
Okay.
Obviously. So go ahead and you can watch me bump it in place. Just sort of bump it a little bit. Get right down on it. Right there. Want to show that again?
Okay.
There's A. Look good?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, how we found those marks, why we wrote them with a marker. It's because his crankshaft damper is rusted. Okay, usually you can see those. They're stamped in with a little stamp. And what's your name?
It's me.
It's me. Crazy name. He sort of drew on here what you should look for if you're looking for those stamps. They sort of look like that when they're stamped in the their lettering stamped in. So you can kind of look for that. This one was rusted up really bad, so we had to sand on it a little bit and find them. And since it's so hard to see, I marked them with a Sharpie, so it's easier to rotate it around. Now this crosshead and this crosshead are both loose. So now we know we're on A1. Wait, this is the engine brake, and there's a little detent. There's like a ball bearing detent on the engine brake. You can sort of feel it. It kind of jumps into the little detent. There's a little bit of movement there when you're lined up with, you know, A1 or whatever cylinder you're on. And then there's a lot of space back. Now that's, the gap should be 0.276, and I'll show how that's done. But always feel for that detent to make sure that detent is working properly, because if it's not, you're going to hear a lot of this going down the road. So, you know, it's not going to sound good. And that's one thing to check for and make sure it's always working correctly. Another thing is, I don't know if you want to zoom back a little bit, it's these things. This thing here, and while you're doing your overhead set, you're going to bump around, you're going to move things around, you're going to be turning wrenches in here. Be very, very careful of these things. These are the wires to the actual engine brakes. You've got two solenoids here, this one, and you've got one back here, right there, which is kind of hard to see without a light, but and this is the engine brake wiring harness. Okay, it's very easy to crack and break these things. Sometimes they're already cracked. The oil just sort of eats them up, makes them brittle. But these things are, it's a single wire. There's not two wires. There's no, you know, complicated plug. It's just a single wire with a little clamp that goes on this tab here. And so just make sure that you don't knock that loose. And also I like to check to make sure they're tight. This one's nice and tight. You see that's nice and snug. Because I've gone into quite a few engines and these things are loose. And they're wiggling around. Well, guess what happens to your engine brake when they're loose? It doesn't work properly. You know, you might go from low to high and not notice a difference. Or sometimes the engine brake works good, sometimes it don't. It can be that. It can also be this plug on the other side. You know, this wiring harness on the other side tends to go bad sometimes too. Externally, that's the plug that feeds it from the ECM. So, you know, sometimes it's the wiring harness, but you know, a lot of times it's these things that have come loose. And just make sure you don't knock them loose, or whenever you're putting this thing back together, you know, you double and triple check that you haven't knocked all this loose or caused a problem somewhere. So it's one thing to always keep an eye out while you're doing your overhead. But I'll describe the valves. This side over here, which is the driver's side of the truck, I guess, we're facing. This side over here is the injector cam. Down here is the injector cam itself. It's normal for these spacers to have a little play. It's normal for this, some of this stuff to move if you get it in the right position. It's normal to have a little bit of side play in these things. A tiny little bit. It's not a big deal. You know, they're not, you know, super precision tight, I guess. But the short arm, looking at it from your side, the passenger side, the short arm, it doesn't matter which cylinder you're on. The short arm is the exhaust side. Okay, that's the exhaust valves, and that's going to be 0.027, the gap between the top of the crosshead and the bottom of the rocker foot. There's a little foot there. The long side is going to be the intake valves, and that's 0.014. So the long side is 0.014, which is the smallest gap that you're going to set. The short side is 0.027. Okay. So that's 0.014, 0.027 for the exhaust. And then the engine brake, it's going to be thick. I mean, it's going to be more than 1/4 inch, because you're going to lean this back all the way, and you're not going to get it between this crosshead and the bottom of the engine brake. There's actually the crosshead actually has a rod coming through it for the engine brake. And the engine brake actually will come up like this, and you'll put your gap gauge in between the engine brake and the top of that rod. The only way to get to it with a regular flat set of feeler gauges is from the exhaust side here. You're going to come in around under the exhaust arm, the exhaust valve arm, and you're going to go straight into under the engine brake to set this engine brake. So that's how you do it with a feeler gauge here. This one's 0.276. This one's 0.027. This one's 0.014. And then, last but not least, is the injector. You adjust your injectors, and you do it incorrectly, and you turn that screw too many times, and you get this injector out of alignment, pretty far off. What can happen is it can put too much torque down on the injector and cause this to bind the cam, and it'll cause that cam to slip. So you can actually create a problem with the cam slipping if you do the injector side wrong. A lot of guys that like to do their own overhead set, they won't touch their injectors because you know, you need a special wrench to do this, special torque wrench. You cannot use a wrench that clicks, and I'll tell you why. In fact, let me go get the wrench and I'll show what the wrench looks like. Cut. All right. A lot of guys use this torque wrench to do the to set the torque on their lock nuts and all that stuff. That's fine for the locking nuts, okay? But that is not fine for setting the torque on the injector set screw, because I'll show you why. When you're on this thing and you're turning it, this one's locked down, but when you're on this thing and you're turning off, you can see this needle. You should set it to 8 Newton meters, okay? And I like to use Newton meters, a little more accurate. This is the correct type of torque wrench. It is not one of those that goes click. It's just a dial type. The reason why, and this was locked down so it's safe to do this, to show you why, is when you're tightening this down, that thing's going to climb and it's going to climb, and that's not, I mean, I got one finger on this. That's not much. One finger is 8 Newton meters, okay? What happens is, as you're turning this, you'll turn this and it'll start getting tighter and tighter and tighter. You'll get to 8 Newton meters and it'll keep going a little ways before it gets to 9, and then going a little ways before it gets to 10. And you'll way over torque that thing. You'll turn that thing way too far and you can cause some problems. That's why you cannot use a clicker type. With the clicker type, by the time it clicks, you almost always have gone too far. I know, in fact, we just did one a few weeks ago with a guy used a clicker type, and I went back and checked it with this, and we found 3 of the injectors were more than a quarter turn off. So that's quite a bit. So you got to use a dial type for the injector side. So if you don't have one, if all you got is a clicker, you want to do an overhead, stay away from the injectors. Just leave those alone. You know, don't mess with them unless you've got the right tool, and do the rest. In fact, I know a lot of guys that's all they do is they just do these, they leave the injectors alone, especially if they're getting really good fuel mileage. You know, if you fuel mileage is 7, 8, 9 miles at a gallon, you know, you're getting really good high fuel mileage, decent fuel mileage. There's no reason to really mess with the injector settings anyway. I mean, unless you got, you know, a lot of miles on the engine, you just want to make sure it's still good. So, we don't know about this engine. It's got what? How many miles?
516.
516, 516,000. Mm-hmm. So we're not sure about it. It's well overdue for an overhead set. Possibly has never been done. So we're going to assume it hasn't, and we're going to do the whole thing with the injectors because we got the right tool. So let's get started with that, and let's go grab some wrenches. Cut.
Recording.
All right. We're lined up on cylinder number 1, A. Both our crossheads are loose. What I like to do is I like to loosen the nuts all the way for every one of these arms, because we're going to adjust them all. This is a 13, the lock nut. This lock nut's at 19, and you need a 24. I like to get a 24 thin wall socket, 6 point. I don't like the 12 points. Get on there, loosen that one up. So we got that one loose. And I like to drive the nut all the way to the top of the set screw. And
Rawze, what's the white paint for?
oh yeah, I put a white paint mark on the injector set screws. Not the nut, but the actual set screw itself that we're going to be turning. And I put a paint mark facing that way on every one all the way down. And the reason why is because I said earlier, it's really easy to go past 8 Newton meters and keep going to 9 or 8.5 or whatever. So what I do is I put a paint mark on all of them so that when I do the adjustment, the procedure is to actually back this off a half a turn. In fact, why don't we go ahead and do it? Just to paint it. The original position's painted, so I can see how far I moved it. I just back it off about a half a turn or so and come back to it a couple of times. That's what they say to do in the book for the engine. And when you come back to it, you watch for 8 pounds or 8 Newton meters. That's 5, and we've got 6, 7, 8, right about there. I'm going to do that a second time. It says to do it a couple of times. 7, 8. And it moved a little more that time, so I'm going to do it a third time because it moved a little further that second time. So you do it twice and it goes to the same exact spot. You know you're good. Okay, right there. So you can see that I actually moved it in a little bit, but not a whole lot. It's important not to take that thing too far because, like I said, you can bottom it out, you can cause the cam to slip or get it way out of adjustment. And that's another reason why you can't use a clicker torque wrench. So, you know, I'm going to do this again just to show, see where it ends up. It should go to the same place a couple of times or a couple of 3 times. And that's it right there. Yeah, see, it's going to the same place every time now. So that's the adjustment right there. That's how you do the injector. And then, of course, for the injector, to torque it down, this should be 55 foot-pounds, which is quite tight. Take our torque wrench. Right now we're sitting at 35. So let's go to, that's 50. That's 55. Okay. So we use that. And we use our socket. A crow's foot doesn't quite fit in there, so I use a socket. And what I do is I take note of where it's at, and I make sure that I don't move it. It's not likely to move. It's got quite a bit of torque on it, so on its own. I do this a lot. I've done this a bunch of times. I've never seen one of these, the set screw, actually move while you were torquing the lock nut. These will, because they don't have any torque on them. But that one, generally, it doesn't move. But I'm going to take real good close note of where it's at, and go ahead and tighten the lock screw. Like there, you can use a clicker for the lock screw, and you can see that it didn't move at all. So that's how I do it. You can try to get in there with a crow's foot. It doesn't really fit that well because you're in between these other two things. Really, the easiest thing that fits in there is a socket. So that's just how I do it. I don't know how other people do it, but it's never turned me wrong yet. The other one, now we'll do I guess we'll do this one. That's the intake valve set with the crosshead. The intake is 14 or 0.014 inches. So we'll find our 0.015, 0.014. I'm just using a regular feeler gauge set. I will say this for those who might buy a cheap set like me. This originally had a screw through it with a little lock washer, and it's got a screw and it unscrews. The first one of these I did, I bought this set at, I think it was Lowe's or something, and I'm over here doing my overhead, and I get about back in there somewhere, and I'm moving my feeler gauges around. Well, guess what happened? This little screw came out, and it fell down on the motor. And
Ouch.
I never did find it. I don't know what happened to it. It was my motor, my truck, thankfully, thank God. It wasn't somebody else's truck, which I would have really felt bad. Bad enough, it was mine. I never found it. I don't know where it's at. It's still in my engine somewhere. Who knows? The nut, I never found it. The screw fell apart. All these blades fell out. So, you know what I did? First thing I do now is I take that screw out and I put a ring in there of thick galvanized wire where it cannot come apart.
Mm-hmm.
So, take note of that.
Right.
I learned that lesson the hard way. Oh my God. And you know, thankfully it's never caused any damage. I don't know where it's at now. It's probably down the bottom of the oil pan now, but you know, maybe I got lucky. To this day, it's not. I haven't had any engine problems. Okay, this one, 0.014. And you just take this and get it underneath that foot. It's kind of a pain because that foot kind of has oil on it. It likes to stick to the crosshead. And what I do is I get a little paper towel or something, get some of the oil off, you know, trying not to get dust on the paper towel in there. and I hold down on it and I kind of rub it, and that kind of squeezes the oil out from under it. And then I take a 5mm and I put a zip tie on my 5mm because if I drop it down in here, I can find it. You drop it down there without oil, you can't find it. You're searching for 3 hours. You're not going to lose it like this.
Right.
So this one, I got this thing all the way up. I just turn it like this with my fingers until it stops on its own. Okay. I'm not applying pressure. I'm just stopping it on its own like that. You can see clearly where it stops. Okay. And then I hold it there and I tighten this down. Let me get some of the oil off of that. There's a lot of oil. Okay. Tighten that down. And I take my 19mm wrench and I kind of hold that so that it can't move, and I lock it down a little bit. Okay? Now, it's supposed to be torqued to 33 foot-pounds. Now, I can go here, and for this one I use my crow's foot because I can get in there with a crow's foot. Okay? If you don't know what a crow's foot is, where's my adapter? This is a crow's foot.
You need a 3/4 to 3/8.
Yeah,
half inch to 3/8.
Half inch to 3/8 adapter for this. Get in here with my crow's foot, and I'll torque it down. So, that's 20. That's 30.
Try that.
35. Okay, 35 foot-pounds of torque. And then I use my little adapter here and my crow's foot, and I make sure the crow's foot is not facing this way but facing that way so you get the right amount of torque on it. And then I come here, get on it, this, and I hold this with my Allen wrench like so to make sure that it doesn't move. I'm going to apply a tiny bit of pressure this way because I'm going to turn it this way to make sure that the set screw doesn't move on me at all. And I take note of where the wrench is. And I just click clack. That's the intake valve. Now we'll do the exhaust valve. Same way. Do my exhaust valve. It's 0.027. This thing don't have a 0.027. Does it? No. It goes to 0.024 only. So what I do is I take 13 and 14. 13 and 14 is 0.027. Alright, so I got up underneath here and I come down on it until it stops. Like that. I rub it a little bit, make sure the oil's out from under it. That's it. I take this, take my little wrench, give it a little bit of snug, and hold it in place. Snug it a little bit, and then get my trusty torque wrench, and there we go. That's the exhaust valve set. And then we do the engine brake. The engine brake, what I did was, it's 0.276, and that's thick. That's like more than a 1/4 inch. Here, let me set this up here. Alright, so what I did on my set, you know, every set might be a little different. But on my set, I added them all up, and I found out that on my set here, if I go to 0.008, from 0.008 all the way to the very end on my set is 0.276. Now I'm not going to tell you all these different blade sizes, but what I did to figure this out was I took a pair of calipers, dial calipers, you know, the regular dial, you get them for $30 at a hardware store, and I measured until I got 0.276 exactly from this set. So that's how I know that's 0.276 on my set. It's just my set, everybody's set probably be different, but you got to have 0.276, and that's quite thick. And there's a trick to putting this one in. And maybe want to zoom in just a little bit here. first of all, and this is the exhaust brake that I'm going to adjust. First of all, this has to be back all the way. So there's a little detent here, so it's kind of, you can see there's already a little bit of a gap, but I have to push it all the way back. And what I do, and it's a 3mm Allen, got another zip tie on it so I don't lose it. That one's easy to lose. Give it about a turn, all the way back, and there's a rod up under here. You know, this crosshead on this side actually has a rod sticking through, and the valve to the crosshead to that rod, between the valve and the rod, is where you stick your fuel gauge. You don't put your fuel gauge here, you put it on that rod, which, I don't know, kind of sticks up, you know, kind of sticks up like that. You put it on the rod and the bottom of the very bottom of this head. So, and the only way to get it on there with a regular feeler gauge set is to come in from this, under this short arm. It'll go right in. See, it goes right in. You can't do it from this side, it kind of blocks it. This side goes right in, it's sitting right on there now. So, it's very easy. You don't have to have a special tool like they tell you. A lot of guys, oh, you gotta have a special tool to do the exhaust brake. No, you don't. You just gotta have .276. Same thing. You know, you get it down on there where it stops, and then you tighten it down. Its engine brake is 15 foot-pounds. So we crank this thing all the way back to 15 foot-pounds, or what we can do is we can use this one, because I think it goes to 15 foot-pounds quite easily. 15 foot-pounds or 20 Newton meters. I'm going to use the Newton meter gauge since we have to use it for the injectors anyway. So we'll go to 20 Newton meters, and we'll just hold this in place like this. There we go. And we'll use this, and we will go to 20 Newton meters. There we go. So that's it. Once we get done with that, we double check ourselves. We make sure that we cannot turn any of these set screws, that we've not missed any. Alright, now we're done with that one. Now we can go to the next cylinder. The next cylinder is going to be, we're going to bar the engine over to position B, and our paperwork says position B is either cylinder number 5 or cylinder number 2. It's probably going to be cylinder number 5 is next. So it says B5 is next. So we'll go to B5. And then, like I said, you can go roll the engine around to B. Make sure both crossheads are loose for cylinder number 5 before you start it. And what I like to do is, you know, when I start, is just I loosen all the set screws or all the lock nuts first, and that way I know I haven't missed anything. When I get done, like I just did, I double check that I've not got any loose lock nuts. So if the first thing you do is loosen all the lock nuts, and then you do all your settings and you lock everything down, to double check yourself before you go to the next valve or the next cylinder, is you just make sure that you've locked all your knob nuts back down. That way you know you didn't miss anything. It's kind of how I do it. I loosen them all first, and then kind of work my way towards setting them. And that's it. I'm not going to film the whole thing, all 6 cylinders. That's just, you know, the rest of them are exactly the same as that one.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it's done. Alright, before we go on, another thing while you're doing your overhead set is you should check your overhead cams. This is one of them that's been removed, so we can see it real well. And here is one of the intake arms for the intake valves, and this is the valve cam. And Brian, I guess Boom 192 on the forum is his nickname.
Yeah.
He was gracious enough to give us these parts so that others could learn from it. He had about 500 something thousand miles, I forget exactly what it was, on his truck. Bought it used. The cam was already in this condition when he bought his truck. He didn't know it. till after he bought it. He went to do an overhead with a guy, and they found these problems. This injector arm is the back of that bearing is damaged heavily. You can see it. It's galled up. So that's some of the things you look for while you're doing your overhead set. You know, when you're turning your motor from A to B to C, you get up there and you look. As you're turning your motor, you turn a little bit, jump up there and look, turn a little more. And you also check this cam. Now, check it for this stuff, because that is very, very bad. That's a bad roller follower. And then, of course, where it was running is right here. And you can see that on the cam, that it's damaged the cam, it's galled it up. That's about 10,000ths of an inch deep. 10 or 12 thousandths of an inch deep. That's pretty deep. That's really bad. So this will cost you fuel mileage. It'll cause your oil samples to come back bad, obviously. It'll cause you a lot of problems. And those metal shavings floating around in there, you know, they find their way to the filter, but before they do, they generally do a lot more damage to other components. So, you know, it's really bad to run the truck with it in this condition. And this cam actually has two bad lobes on it. Actually, I think this arm is for this one. Yeah, it was on this one. And you can see it was eating that arm up, or that lobe up on the cam. So that's you just kind of watch for that. I know it's underneath all the, you know, rocker arms and all the other stuff the cam is, but you can kind of look for it. Each of these peaks, each of the tops of these lobes, for that kind of wear. So this is the result of somebody not taking care of the engine, I think, and poor fuel, you know, poor oil changing habits or something. Because, you know, I'm about to take mine apart. Mine's got 720,000 miles on it, but I took it apart at 580,000, and at 580,000, the worst of my lobes looked like this. I mean, they were just starting to change color. They weren't even starting to wear yet at 580,000. So we'll see what it looks like at 720 when I get mine apart in the next day or so. But you know, the worst of mine were still very good looking like this, and nothing like this. None of that stuff in mine. But I use Rotella T, no Lucas. I use in the summertime. I use 85-140, some cheap 85-140 thick gear lube. I use 1 gallon in the summertime to thicken up my oil just a bit. It does this. You know, it thickens the oil like Lucas will, but the difference between Lucas is Lucas has no additive package at all. It actually thins your additive package out, whereas some gear oil at least has an additive package to help, you know, keep it from thinning out your additive package. So it's got some additive package of its own. I think it helps a lot. It definitely lowers turbo temperatures. I can see that on my turbo, on pyro gauge. So I think it helps, and that's what I've done. If it's bad for the motor, well, it ain't killed mine yet. It ain't even caused any excess wear. So that's what I do, and that's, like I say, that came out of Brian's truck. So let's go turn some screws and do an overhead.